They marched us in before dawn, a long quiet line of tired women who no longer had the strength to ask where we were going. We had seen too many fences already. Too many gates. Too many promises of temporary. But this was different. Not barbed wire. Not gray walls. But something else entirely: low buildings, wide fields, rows of pine trees, and silence. The kind of silence that makes you feel both safe and uncertain at once. I remember gripping my suitcase tightly, not because it carried anything important, but because it was mine. And in those days, anything that was yours, truly yours, was rare. They told us this was a camp in the American South. I didn't know the name then, but I knew the smell: warm, humid air carrying hints of pine, wood smoke, and something strange. Something faintly sweet. At first, I thought it was coming from the laundry building. Or maybe the canteen. It wasn't unpleasant, just unfamiliar. Like something baking that had forgotten how to be bread. My name is Ilse Schneider. I was 29 years old that summer, and I had once been a baker. Not just a woman who made bread, a trained artisan. I studied under a master in Berlin. I knew the difference between rye proofing times, how to balance sourdough fermentation, how to score crusts so they didn't tear. Bread was science. Bread was skill. Bread was pride. And this smell, whatever it was not bread. They assigned us beds, rules, routines. The Americans, the women who worked in the kitchens, didn't speak much. But they were kind. Not soft, but kind. The first meal we were given came on tin trays. Beans, some kind of stew, and a square of yellow cake? That's what I thought at first. It was golden, warm, crumbly. I remember the women around me whispering in German. What is this? Is it dessert? Why does it smell like that? One of us, I don't remember who, took a bite and immediately made a face. Pig food, she said in disgust. Cornbread. I didn't even try it at first. I grew up on dense loaves, dark rye, seeded wheat, sour crusts that cracked like old stone. Bread that had weight. History. Backbone. This yellow square was soft, sweet, simple. It offended everything I thought I knew about baking. That night, I wrote in the corner of my journal, Americans think this is bread. We truly are in a different world. But hunger has a way of humbling you. Over the next few weeks, I noticed something. Each time cornbread appeared on the tray, fewer women left it untouched. Some took small bites. Others dipped it in soup. One woman even asked for another piece. I mocked them quietly at first. Don't lose your standards, I'd whisper. This is peasant food. For cattle, not people. But the smell. It kept following me. Sweet. Warm. Soft. Like home, if you forgot what home was supposed to be. One afternoon, I was assigned to kitchen duty, cleaning, not cooking. That's when I saw how it was made. A southern woman, older, calm, humming something slow, poured batter into cast iron skillets already hot with butter. It sizzled as it touched metal. The smell exploded. I froze. That scent I'd been judging for weeks now filled the room like a blanket after cold. And I felt something in my chest loosen. She must have noticed my face, because she smiled. Didn't speak. Just cut a small wedge from the corner, added a pat of butter. And held it out. I didn't say thank you. I didn't even nod. I just took it. I told myself it was curiosity. That I'd take one bite and confirm my opinion. But when I bit into it, the room shifted. The outside was golden and crisp, the inside warm and soft, not like bread, not like cake, but something in between. And the butter. Oh, the butter melted into every bite like it had always belonged there. I didn't speak. But I came back for more. I didn't tell the others. Not right away. It felt too personal. Too much like betrayal of something I couldn't name. But I started looking forward to the smell. To kitchen duty. To the women who hummed and smiled, even when we didn't. I still thought of home. Of thick crusts and long fermentations. But I began to understand something. Bread wasn't just about flour and time. It was about what you brought to the table and who sat with you. And slowly, without realizing, I stopped laughing at the yellow square. I started hoping for it. The second time I tasted it, I did not pretend it was an accident. By then I knew the rhythm of the kitchen, the way iron pans were preheated before batter ever touched them, the way the oven doors were opened with a confident wrist so the heat did not fall out like a scolded child, the way butter was not a garnish but a promise. I learned to stand in the right corner, out of the way, where the air curled sweet and warm and did not belong to anyone. The older woman with the steady humming had a companion some days, a younger cook with sleeves rolled and wrists dusted with flour. They moved as if they had been doing this since before I was born. I told myself I was studying. After all, I was a baker. Or I had been. In my old life, I could diagnose a dough by touch the way a physician knows a pulse, too tight, too slack, overproofed, starved. I had handled heavy rye, sour wheat, loaves that announced themselves with a crack when you pressed them. I knew the language of crust and crumb. But cornbread did not speak that language. It spoke another, simpler kinder. There was no long fermentation to watch, no nervous waiting for air to make a home where it had not been invited. It was a bread that believed in immediacy. Measure, mix, heat, serve. No nostalgia. No lecturing. You could taste it within minutes of a thought, still breathing steam, still deciding who it wanted to be. I grew embarrassed by how much I looked forward to the kitchen shifts. Not the labor. That remained dull and necessary. It was the moment near the end, when batter met iron and sang, when the room lifted as if someone had opened a window inside your chest. The scent sat low and sweet, like sun on timber. When the woman cut wedges and let the blade rest a second in the golden line it had made, I felt the strangest urge to apologize to the bread I had mocked, to the people I had dismissed, to the part of myself that had confused pride with dignity. I began to notice details my arrogance had ignored. The batter was not only cornmeal and milk. Sometimes there was buttermilk, tangier, softer. Sometimes an egg made it richer. Sometimes a drizzle of bacon drippings went into the heating pan before the pour, adding a whisper of smoke that did not bully the sweetness, but framed it. When honey appeared, it was never stirred into the batter. It waited in a tin on the counter, to be offered at the end, like kindness after a hard day. One afternoon, the older woman set 3 bowls on the table in a row. In the first, cornmeal as fine as sifted sand. In the second, something paler flour, I realized, only a handful to keep the crumb tender. In the third, salt and leavening measured with that particular American habit of trusting spoons. No scales. No weights. It made me itch at first. But then I saw the precision lived elsewhere, in consistency, in heat, in the way she knew the batter was right because it fell from the wooden spoon slow as a field-lazy river. I began, without meaning to imitate her hum. Not the melody, only the patience. In the barracks, the change was quiet but relentless. At first, cornbread was the thing some of us left on the tray, the golden square with the wrong pedigree. Then someone tried it warm with butter. Another crumbled it into beans. A third discovered the comfort of sweetness, honey pooling in the little fractures of the slice, like light settling into plowed earth. The comments shifted. Fewer wrinkled noses. Fewer smart remarks said too loudly. More quick glances to see if the pan would appear again. It did. Not always. Not predictably. But often enough that hope learned a schedule. I kept pretending I was above it. Then, on a morning when the sky was too bright for the hour, I woke before the whistle, washed, and stood by the door with my laces tied as if I had an appointment with something important. That was the day I admitted it. I wanted the bread. Not because I was starved of calories. Because I was starved of softness. Bread had always been my language. In Berlin, I had spoken fluently in crusts. Here is respect. Here is patience. Here is what happens when people wait for something together. Now, far from everything I had called civilized, a different bread was teaching me a dialect I had once considered beneath me. It reminded me that pride and prejudice share a wall so thin you can hear laughter through it if you try. The cooks did not treat us as students or guests. They treated us as a reality. I respected that. They did not offer lectures about their grandmothers or histories or fields. They did not ask where we came from or what we believed. They measured, mixed, poured, cut. Sometimes one of them left a skillet on the table a moment longer than necessary. Sometimes a tin of honey appeared when it had not been requested. Sometimes on a day when the air felt heavy and people kept their heads down, there was butter so soft it needed only to be looked at to melt. There were rules, of course. There were always rules. But generosity lives in the margins, and the margins are surprisingly wide when people choose to see them. A wedge pressed into a hand is not a speech, it is a thesis. Warmth is an argument you can swallow before you think of a rebuttal. The first time I really helped, it was because the younger cook's sleeve had slipped and batter kissed the stovetop with a hiss that made everyone flinch. Instinct moved me. I reached past, caught the bowl, and steadied it with the practiced angle of someone who has held 100 heavier things. The older woman looked at me, not startled, not grateful, but appraising. She slid a clean spoon my way. No words. Just a test. I mixed until the batter loosened. When I lifted the spoon, it fell in that slow ribbon I had been watching for weeks. I did not smile. Neither did she. But something shifted in the room, not unlike the moment when bread takes the oven and decides to become itself. After that, I was no longer just the cleaner who stood too close to the heat. I was the one they let measure the cornmeal, level the spoon with a firm tap, pour the milk in a thin line rather than a dump. Once, the older woman stepped aside and nodded toward the skillet already shimmering with butter. My hands knew what to do before my mind gave permission. I poured. The batter spread to the edges, spoke in bubbles, and took the pan with a modest pride that made my throat tight. When it came out, the edges had browned into a lace as fragile as the confidence I had nearly lost since arriving. I cut carefully, the knife making a small crisp sound as it entered, then a sigh as it left. I set a wedge aside for myself without ceremony, placed another onto a tray headed to the line, and watched as the women I had once lectured with my superiority reached for the thing I had helped make. I did not announce anything in the barracks that evening. I did not confess. But I sat with my tin tray and tasted what my hands had assisted, and I felt an old arrogance break apart the way a too proud crust crumbles under a soft knife. I thought of the loaves from home and did not betray them. I thought of this new square and did not betray it either. There is room in a human heart for more than one truth at a time. Word travels strangely when no one chooses to speak. Soon, the others began to ask in the small ways that do not call attention. Will there be, they would say, and stop, letting the sentence end in an ellipsis shaped like a pan. When it arrived, they lined up open-faced, bowls ready to be crumbled into, fingers ready to be buttered. They asked for it every day. One of the guards muttered like he was amused by our predictability. He was not wrong. Routine is a raft. People will cling to it even when the shore is in sight. I learned to make the bread without a recipe. I learned the way a room tells you how much sweetness it needs. Some days the batter wanted only salt, as if to remind us that life could be simple. Other days the tin of honey felt like necessary medicine, and no one argued. On rare evenings when the air tasted like rain and stories seemed closer to the surface, the older woman would add a little more butter than either of us would admit. No one complained when the slices shone. A memory from my past chose then to visit and refuse to leave. My grandfather's hands, cracked, steady, lifting a loaf from the hearth and thumping its bottom to test for doneness. He would hold the bread to his ear and listen, as if something inside might be singing. I had not understood the gesture when I was small. Now, with a warm square in my palm and a wooden table under my forearms, I listened to something else, the sudden hush that falls when flavor teaches humility. We did not become friends with the cooks. The world insisted on its categories. But we became something harder to name and easier to recognize. I began to measure my days not by fences or rosters, but by the memory of heat on my forearms and the knowledge that goodness can arrive without asking who you are first. There were women among us who had never baked. There were also women who had, and who had resented the drudgery of it, who had sworn never to touch a mixing bowl again. I watched both groups change. The first learned wonder. The second forgave the kitchen for all the hours it had stolen and discovered that a recipe is sometimes a map back to yourself. On the morning I understood how far I had traveled without moving, the older woman pushed a small jar across the table with the back of her fingers. Inside, a few spoonfuls of pale gold. Not store-bought honey, but something raw, a little cloudy, with a scent like cut clover. She did not explain. I did not ask. I used it sparingly, a stripe on each wedge as if painting light. When we served that pan, the line moved slower. People closed their eyes, not for worship, not for theater, only to let the moment take its full size. I thought of the words I had written in my journal those first days: peasant, pig food, uncivilized. I did not tear the page out. I left it where it was to remember who I had been before kindness corrected me. That night, after lights out, someone whispered from the bunk below, not to me and not to everyone, but into the dark itself, "I hope there is more tomorrow." The voice carried no greed, only gratitude with a future tense. I understood. Hope, when given a flavor, is easier to believe. I slept deeply for the first time in months. And in the morning, when I woke to the whisper of pine through the slats and the faint rumor of heat beginning in the kitchen, I realized that the line between us and them had thinned in the place where steam rises and people share it. A bridge had been built, not with speeches or apologies, but with a pan, some meal, and hands that had decided quietly, stubbornly, to make something good and pass it across a table. I had laughed at that bread. Now I was learning to listen to it. And, without anyone deciding the rule, we all began to ask for it every day. I didn't ask. I never asked. Even as my hands itched to measure, to mix, to move with purpose again, I stayed in the rhythm I had learned. Clean, observe, assist. Stay just enough in the corner to be useful, not enough to be noticed. But something had shifted. In them. In me. The cooks no longer looked through me. They didn't look at me either, not in the way people often do when they're measuring your worth. Instead, they handed me things. A spoon. A bowl. A glance that said, "You know what to do." I didn't smile. I didn't need to. This was not joy. It was restoration. It happened one gray morning when the sky pressed down heavy on the pine tops and the kitchen felt warm in a way that had nothing to do with heat. The older woman, the one whose name I still didn't know, placed a cast iron skillet on the prep table and said nothing. Then, slowly, she stepped back. And waited. No words. No nod. Just silence and space. That was her invitation. I ran my hands along the inside of the bowl, an old gesture from my Berlin days, checking for grain, for temperature, for intent. Then I picked up the tin scoop, measured the cornmeal, leveled it flat. I could feel her eyes, but not in judgment. In quiet trust. Flour. Baking powder. Salt. Then the egg, the buttermilk. I whisked, not hurriedly, not ceremoniously, but with the confidence that had lived dormant inside me, the kind of knowing that returns only when it is needed, not merely remembered. I poured the batter into the pan already slick with hot butter. It hissed the way it always did, like breath meeting fire. And I stood there, holding the spoon, suddenly aware that my hands were not trembling. They didn't praise me. They didn't have to. They let me cut the first slice. And when it was time to serve it, I carried the tray myself. In the barracks, no one said a word as the scent drifted in. Heads lifted. Eyes followed. And as I laid the pan down, one of the women, a woman who once mocked the bread louder than I ever did, reached for a piece before the tray had even stopped moving. She bit into it and closed her eyes. Not in reverence. In memory. Like something in her knew this wasn't just bread anymore. It was what the day had been missing. Word spread, though no one spoke it aloud. Ilse had made the bread. By the next week, they were watching the windows near the kitchen, hoping to see my shadow moving inside. Hoping that meant another batch was coming. Hoping that, even in this strange country, with its strange food and its strange warmth, someone among them had learned the recipe well enough to make it feel like something was theirs. I didn't claim ownership, but I felt the responsibility of it. Bread has always been like that. It demands something of you. It's not just ingredients. It's listening. It's restraint. It's giving people something before they ask for it and letting them believe they found it themselves. The older cook began giving me her ingredients without explanation. No spoken lessons. No instructions. Just offerings. I wrote nothing down. The recipe wasn't on paper, it was in timing and patience, in the way the batter felt when it fell, in the sound of the oven when it was ready. The bread didn't just fill stomachs anymore. It filled gaps. between women, between guards and prisoners, between mornings and nights that all looked the same. Some even began calling it by name. Not just that square or the yellow stuff. They called it ours. And for the first time since the day we arrived, I believed it. Late one evening, I stayed after my shift to clean the pans. Alone. I took the sponge, rinsed each skillet slowly, hands lingering on the handles. Cast iron remembers. That's something we say in baking. The more you use it, the better it gets. But it also holds on to things, flavors, seasons, mistakes. I wonder what these pans remembered of us. Before I turned out the light, I took a scrap of paper from my apron and wrote something I hadn't dared say. It's not just food. It's what happens when no one asks you or before they feed you. I folded it, tucked it into a small gap behind the flour tins. Not for anyone to find. Just to leave something behind that wasn't bitterness. The next morning, the woman who used to call it pig food, she was the first in line. She didn't meet my eyes. But when she took the slice, she whispered, "Warm." Just like the last time. And I understood that this was how it worked now. One pan at a time. One woman at a time. We were becoming something no one had trained us to be. The end came not with announcements, but with quiet shifts, new forms, fewer guards, and the word transfer whispered in the laundry line. Some of us would go home. Some elsewhere. No one spoke of it much. But we all knew what was ending. By then, I was making the cornbread nearly every time. The cooks trusted me with the measurements, with the heat, with the silence of the kitchen before dawn. They didn't praise me. They simply let me do it. That was all I needed. The last morning was gray, wet with light rain. I made 2 pans not out of extravagance, but reverence. The older cook brought a small jar of honey and placed it beside the skillet, along with a folded cloth. Inside was a cast-iron pan, not new, not spotless, but seasoned. It held years in its weight. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. It was a gift, not just of iron, but of memory. We served the bread like always, no ceremony. Just warm slices handed to hands that now took them without hesitation. The woman who once called it pig food? She asked for 2 pieces that day. When I packed my things to leave, I slipped the pan inside my bag with care. Not because it was valuable, but because it had seen something of who I had become. Back home, I baked again. Dark rye. Hearty wheat. But one evening, I pulled out that old skillet. I made the cornbread. No recipe. Just what my hands remembered. I left a piece for the neighbor. One for the delivery boy. One for myself. The smell filled the kitchen like the memory of something that had once saved me from myself. People asked what it was. I called it warm cornbread. Nothing more. Because the bread had done enough already. Sometimes I think of the women I stood with. I hope they remember, too, not just the fences or the rules, but the warmth, the sweetness, the small piece of something that asked nothing of us, except that we give it a chance. They asked for it every day. Now I do, too. Not always with words, mostly with gratitude.